The stars belonged to them. They had always belonged to them. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled every corner of space that mattered. 3 ancient races sat at the top of this empire, and they were gods among the lesser creatures that crawled through the darkness between worlds. The Zephyrians came first. Tall and thin like pale shadows, they could reach into any mind and twist it to their will. Their thoughts moved faster than light itself, jumping from star to star without need for ships or messages. When a Zephyrian spoke inside your head, you listened. When they commanded, you obeyed. There was no choice in the matter. The Vorthak were masters of energy itself. Their bodies glowed with power that could melt mountains or freeze entire oceans. They could reach across space and turn a planet's core into ice, or set its atmosphere on fire with a single thought. Their weapons were made of pure force, invisible death that struck without warning and left nothing behind but empty space. The Nexari were the strangest of all. They could change reality itself, bending the laws of physics like soft metal. They walked through solid walls, made gravity flow backward and turned time into circles. To them, the universe was just a toy that they could reshape whenever they felt bored. Together, these 3 races had built something that had never existed before. An empire that stretched across 1,000,000 worlds, where war was impossible because resistance was pointless. They had found every intelligent species in the galaxy and brought them under their rule. Some came willingly, drawn by promises of knowledge and power. Others fought until the Zephyrians reached into their leaders' minds and made them surrender. A few tried to hide in the dark spaces between stars, but the Vorthak always found them. The Council's great ships moved through space like moving cities, each one carrying enough power to destroy entire solar systems. Their technology was so advanced that magic and science had become the same thing. They had conquered death itself, extending their lives for thousands of years. They had no need for food, for sleep, or for any of the weaknesses that plagued lesser beings. In the center of their empire sat the Nexus, a space station the size of a small moon. Its walls were made of crystallized time, and its halls stretched through dimensions that had no names. Here, the 3 ruling races met to decide the fate of countless worlds. They spoke in languages of pure thought, sharing ideas that would drive ordinary minds insane. The Council had long ago stopped thinking of themselves as merely intelligent. They were evolution's final answer, the perfect result of billions of years of growth and change. They had transcended every limitation that held back primitive life. Physical bodies were tools they could modify at will, matter and energy bent to their desires. Even death was just another rule they had chosen to break. This was why the radio signals from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow star barely registered on their sensors. The signals were crude, chaotic, and filled with the simple thoughts of a young species still trapped on their birth world. The planet was covered in water and rock, with patches of green life clinging to its surface. Its inhabitants had barely learned to split the atom, and they spent most of their time fighting each other over resources that the Council could create from empty space. The beings that lived there called themselves humans, though the Council's computers had trouble translating the concept behind the word. The humans seemed to be a fairly standard carbon-based species, neither especially intelligent nor remarkably strong. They built crude machines and simple weapons, and their technology advanced at the slow pace typical of primitive civilizations. What made them slightly interesting was their unusual behavior patterns. Unlike most species at their level of development, humans seemed incapable of unity. They divided themselves into thousands of small groups that constantly fought over territory, resources, and ideas. Their planet was covered with the scars of their endless wars, and their history was written in blood and ash. The Council's xenobiologists noted this in their reports but saw nothing worth studying further. Aggressive primitive species were common throughout the galaxy. Usually such races either destroyed themselves before reaching space travel, or they learned cooperation when faced with the Council's overwhelming power. Either way, they posed no threat to the established order. The human radio signals continued to bounce through space, carrying their simple messages about their small concerns. They spoke of their tribal conflicts, their basic scientific discoveries, and their dreams of reaching other worlds. To the Council, it was like listening to insects buzzing in a garden, mildly amusing, but ultimately meaningless. In the Nexus, the three ruling races continued their eternal discussions about matters that spanned galaxies. They planned the construction of new star systems, debated the merits of different forms of consciousness, and designed experiments that would run for thousands of years. The fate of primitive species like humans was left to automated systems and junior administrators. The Council had protocols for dealing with developing civilizations. Stage 1 species, still bound to their homeworlds, were simply monitored until they achieved faster-than-light travel. Stage 2 species, capable of interstellar travel but not interstellar war, were contacted and given the choice to join the Empire peacefully. Stage 3 species, advanced enough to pose a potential threat, were brought into the Council's structure immediately. Their leaders' minds adjusted to ensure loyalty. No species had ever required a Stage 4 protocol because no species had ever proven capable of challenging the Council's authority. The very idea was absurd. The Council commanded forces that could remake the fundamental laws of physics. They possessed knowledge gathered from 1,000,000 worlds and 10,000 years of rule. They were, quite simply, unstoppable. So when the automated systems filed their routine report about the radio signals from the third planet around the yellow star, the information was stored in vast databases and forgotten. Humans would eventually develop space travel, meet Council representatives, and join the Empire like countless species before them. It was as inevitable as gravity, as certain as the movement of stars. The Council feared nothing because there was nothing left in the universe for them to fear. They had seen every form of life, conquered every type of civilization, and overcome every challenge the galaxy could offer. They were the final word in evolution, the ultimate expression of intelligence and power. They had no way of knowing that their greatest test was just beginning to build its first rockets. 3 months after the first radio signals reached Council space, Commander Vexhai of the Zephyrian fleet received his orders. The message appeared directly in his mind, crystal clear and impossible to ignore. He was to take a standard subjugation, force to the third planet of system designation 7834b, and bring its inhabitants into the Council's empire. It was routine work. Vexhai had done this hundreds of times before, visiting dozens of primitive worlds and adding their populations to the Council's vast collection of subjects. The process was always the same. His ships would appear in the planet's sky, impressive and terrible. The locals would panic, as they always did. Then the Zephyrian telepaths would reach into the minds of the planet's leaders and make them understand their new place in the universe. Most species surrendered immediately once they felt the touch of Zephyrian thoughts. The smart ones recognized power when they saw it and accepted their fate without struggle. The stubborn ones required a demonstration of what the Council's weapons could do to cities and armies. But in the end, they all knelt before the Empire's might. The fleet that left Council space was smaller than usual. Intelligence reports suggested the humans had fewer than 10 billion individuals spread across their single world. Their technology was primitive, their weapons crude, and their society fragmented. 3 heavy cruisers and their escort ships would be more than enough to handle the situation. Vexhai's flagship, the Mind's Edge, led the small fleet through the space between dimensions. The journey took only days, though it covered distances that would take human light years to cross. As they dropped back into normal space near the human planet, the ship's sensors immediately began mapping the crude satellites and space stations orbiting the blue and green world below. The humans had detected their arrival within minutes. Radio. Signals flooded the space around Earth as the planet's primitive communication networks went wild with panic and confusion. Military forces across the world went to high alert, their simple radar systems tracking the Council ships with desperate intensity. Vexhai found their reaction amusing. Most species reacted with fear and awe when Council ships appeared in their skies. These humans seemed more angry than afraid, scrambling to prepare defenses that could not possibly work against technology beyond their understanding. The first mistake happened when Vexhai decided to make contact. Following standard procedure, He ordered his telepaths to reach out to the human leaders and establish mental communication. The Council had learned long ago that direct mind-to-mind contact was the most efficient way to explain the situation to primitive species. Physical communication was slow and prone to misunderstanding, but thoughts were universal. Senior telepath Yelandra was the first to make contact. She had touched thousands of alien minds during her centuries of service, from the simple animal thoughts of pre-intelligent species to the complex mental structures of advanced civilizations. She was prepared for the usual range of responses: fear, confusion, desperate attempts at resistance, or immediate submission. She was not prepared for what she found inside the first human mind she touched. The contact lasted less than 3 seconds. Yelandra's psychic scream echoed through the ship's mental networks as she was thrown back from the human's consciousness, like a swimmer caught in a riptide. She collapsed on the bridge, her normally pale blue skin flickering between colors. As her mind struggled to process what she had experienced, the human's thoughts had been chaos, not the simple chaos of an undeveloped mind, but something far worse. The human consciousness was like a storm of contradictions, holding dozens of conflicting ideas at the same time without any apparent distress. Love and hatred existed side by side. Logic warred with emotion, not in the clean patterns the Zephyrians were used to, but in a tangled mess that defied understanding. Worse, the human had somehow fought back. Instead of submitting to mental contact, the alien consciousness had tried to push into Yelandra's own mind, probing her thoughts with curiosity rather than fear. The sensation was like having someone rifle through her private memories while asking endless questions about everything they found. Vexhai ordered 2 more telepaths to attempt contact with different humans. The results were identical. Both psychics were overwhelmed by the bizarre nature of human consciousness and thrown back from the contact with varying degrees of mental damage. The third telepath, a veteran named Morden, who had successfully contacted over 2,000 species, refused to try after witnessing his colleagues' conditions. The second mistake came when Vexhai decided to demonstrate the Council's power through more conventional means. If telepathic contact was somehow impossible, the humans would learn their place through a show of force. He ordered the Vorthak energy weapons to target one of the planet's military installations, a naval base on a small island in the middle of an ocean. The energy beam lanced down from orbit, designed to disrupt the bioelectric fields of any living creature within a half-mile radius. It was a weapon that had never failed to instantly disable entire populations, shutting down their nervous systems without permanent damage and allowing for easy capture and processing. The beam struck the naval base exactly as planned, but instead of the expected result, something impossible happened. Most of the humans in the target area stumbled and fell, clearly affected by the energy disruption. But within minutes, they were getting back up. Their movements were clumsy and unsteady, but they were conscious and mobile. More shocking still, the base's defenders immediately began adapting to the attack. They started wearing metal mesh over their clothing, grounding the energy discharge. They moved in short bursts, taking cover between pulses of the weapon. Some even began using mirrors and reflective surfaces to scatter the beam's focus. The third mistake was Vexhai's decision to send down ground forces to capture human specimens for study. 1,000 Council warriors, equipped with personal energy, weapons, and psychic shields, descended on the damaged naval base expecting to find confused and helpless primitives ready for collection. Instead, they found humans who had spent the last hour preparing for war. The humans had no shields against energy weapons, no protection against psychic attack, and no technology that could match the Council's equipment. But they had something the Council had never encountered before. They refused to acknowledge that they were beaten. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, fewer than half of the Council's warriors made it back to their ships. They brought with them reports that none of the commanders wanted to believe. The humans had used their environment as a weapon, turning every piece of debris into shrapnel, every building into a fortress, and every shadow into an ambush point. They had fought with tools, with furniture, with pieces of their own destroyed equipment. When they ran out of ammunition for their primitive firearms, they used knives. When the knives broke, they used rocks. When they were cornered and outnumbered, They simply refused to surrender, fighting until they could no longer move. Most disturbing of all, they had shown no fear of death. Council warriors were trained to expect surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. These humans seemed to consider dying in battle an acceptable outcome, as long as they took enemies with them. As the battered council fleet prepared to retreat to a safe distance, Vexhai found himself facing a problem that had never appeared in any tactical manual. For the first time in the council's long history, a primitive species had not only resisted their authority, but had actually fought them to a standstill. The humans were still down there, still broadcasting their chaotic radio signals, still preparing for the next attack. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Council's perfect empire had just discovered that it was not invincible after all. The news of the failed first contact reached the Nexus within hours, traveling through the Council's thought networks faster than light itself. For the first time in 10,000 years, an emergency session was called. The three ruling races gathered in the crystalline halls of their great station, their representatives flickering between dimensions as they tried to understand what had gone wrong. High Archon Zelthera of the Zephyrians spoke first, her mental voice carrying undertones of confusion and something that might have been fear. She replayed the telepathic contact attempts, sharing the chaotic storm of human consciousness that had damaged three of her best operatives. The other council members experienced the memory and recoiled from the alien wrongness of human thought patterns. Lord Commander Vakthos of the Vorthak displayed the energy weapon readings, showing how the humans had somehow remained functional despite direct nervous system disruption. The bioelectric patterns made no sense according to established science. Human neural networks operated on principles that the Council's computers could not classify or predict. Nexari Prime Yulkasim folded reality around himself as he spoke, his words echoing from multiple dimensions at once. His forces had detected strange fluctuations in space-time around the human planet during the battle, as if the presence of human consciousness was somehow affecting the fundamental laws of physics in ways that should have been impossible. The Council reached their decision quickly. The humans represented an unknown factor in their perfect equation of galactic control. Such anomalies could not be allowed to exist. A full battle fleet would be dispatched to eliminate the problem before it could spread. But the humans were not waiting passively for the next attack. The debris from the Council landing craft had been scattered across the naval base, and human scientists swarmed over every piece like ants discovering treasure. They took apart alien power cells with tools meant for repairing engines. They studied energy weapon components under microscopes designed for medical research. They ran electrical current through fragments of Council armor using car batteries and jumper cables. Most species would have spent decades trying to understand the principles behind Council technology before attempting to copy it. Humans began building crude versions within days using duct tape, copper wire, and an alarming willingness to ignore safety protocols that would have horrified proper engineers. Their first attempts failed spectacularly. Makeshift energy weapons exploded in laboratories. Experimental power sources melted holes in concrete floors. 3 separate research facilities had to be evacuated when human scientists tried to reverse engineer Nexari dimensional equipment using techniques that violated several laws of physics. But the humans kept trying. When one approach failed, they tried 10 others. When those failed, they tried combinations that made no logical sense. They treated impossible problems like puzzles to be solved through persistence and creative stupidity. Meanwhile, something unprecedented was happening across Earth. The various human nations, which had been fighting each other for thousands of years, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that made their old conflicts seem meaningless. Ancient enemies put aside their hatred to share technology and information. Military leaders who had spent their careers planning to destroy each other began working together to plan humanity's defense. The change was not gradual or peaceful. Humans did not suddenly become wise and cooperative. Instead, they channeled their natural aggression toward the new threat, focusing their talent for violence and destruction on a target they could all agree deserved it. Every weapon, every soldier, every resource on the planet was turned toward a single goal: making the aliens regret coming to Earth. The Council's main battle fleet arrived 6 months after the first encounter. 200 ships strong it was, a force capable of sterilizing entire star systems. At its head flew the Eternal Dominion, flagship of Grand Admiral Kethvar, who had conquered 47 worlds without suffering a single defeat. The humans met them at the edge of their solar system. Somehow, impossibly, the primitive species had managed to launch ships into deep space. The vessels were crude beyond belief, barely more than metal boxes wrapped around primitive fusion engines and filled with explosive charges. They had no shields, no energy weapons, and no defensive systems that the Council could identify. But there were thousands of them. The human fleet attacked like a swarm of angry insects, each ship following its own chaotic flight path with no apparent coordination or strategy. Council tactical computers designed to predict and counter organized military formations found themselves unable to track the seemingly random movements of individual human vessels. The humans had no intention of winning a traditional space battle. Instead, they threw their ships at the Council fleet like missiles, ramming into alien vessels with suicidal determination. When the fusion engines were damaged, human crews detonated them manually. When ships were boarded by Council warriors, human defenders triggered explosive charges that destroyed their own vessels rather than allow them to be captured. It was not warfare as the Council understood it. It was organized madness, a form of combat that prioritized causing damage over self-preservation. For every human ship destroyed, 2 more appeared to take its place, their crews screaming battle cries in languages the Council's translators could not parse. The battle lasted for days. The Council fleet won, eventually, but the victory came at a cost that stunned the alien commanders. Nearly a third of their ships had been damaged or destroyed by an enemy that should not have been able to reach space, let alone mount an effective resistance. Worse, the humans had somehow managed to capture several Council vessels intact. As the alien fleet regrouped and prepared for the final assault on Earth, long-range sensors detected energy signatures that should have been impossible. The humans were not just copying Council technology anymore. They were improving it. Grand Admiral Kethvar found himself in a position he had never experienced before. He commanded the most powerful military force in the galaxy, but his enemy was adapting faster than he could plan new attacks. Every strategy he employed was met with countermeasures that made no logical sense but somehow worked anyway. The final approach to Earth revealed the extent of human ingenuity. The planet's surface was covered with energy shield generators built from salvaged Council technology and human industrial equipment. Orbital stations bristled with weapons that fired projectiles made from compressed matter, turning simple metal into ammunition that could pierce advanced armor through sheer kinetic force. Most disturbing of all were the humans themselves. Council deep-scan sensors detected millions of human soldiers equipped with crude but functional copies of Council personal equipment. They had somehow learned to jam Zephyrian telepathy, using devices that generated the same chaotic mental static that had overwhelmed the first contact team. The invasion of Earth began at dawn on what humans would later call Victory Day. 1 million Council warriors descended on the planet's surface, supported by the full might of the galaxy's most advanced military technology. They expected to face desperate but ultimately hopeless resistance from a primitive species fighting for its survival. Instead, they found an enemy that had spent the last 6 months turning their entire world into a weapon. Every city was a fortress. Every mountain hid artillery positions. Every forest concealed human fighters who struck without warning and vanished like ghosts. The humans had learned to fight the Council's war, but they fought it with human rules. They used the aliens' own technology against them, but combined it with tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. They turned surrender into a trap, retreat into ambush, and defeat into victory through sheer refusal to accept that the battle was over. 3 weeks into the invasion, Grand Admiral Kethvar received a message that would have been impossible just months before. His forces controlled less than 10% of the planet's surface, and human resistance was growing stronger every day. For the first time in Council history, an invasion was failing not through superior enemy technology, but through the simple fact that the enemy would not stop fighting. The humans had done something that 10,000 years of galactic conquest had not prepared the Council to face. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that the Council's power was not absolute after all. The first rebellion began on Kepler Station, a mining colony in the Outer Rim territories. The Vorthak overseers had ruled there for 3 centuries, their energy weapons keeping the local population in line through fear and demonstrations of power. But news of the human resistance had reached even the darkest corners of Council space, carried by traders and whispered in the shadows of worker dormitories. When the Vorthak attempted their usual crowd control tactics, something unexpected happened. The miners did not scatter in terror as they always had before. Instead, they stood their ground, covering their faces with metal mesh and reflective materials, copying techniques they had heard about from Earth. The energy weapons that had once paralyzed entire crowds now only slowed them down. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Within days, similar uprisings erupted on dozens of worlds as species that had lived under Council rule for millennia suddenly discovered that their masters were not invincible. The humans had shown them something they thought was impossible. Resistance could work. Back on Earth, humanity was learning lessons that terrified the Council more than any weapon. Each failed invasion attempt taught them new ways to fight, new weaknesses to exploit, and new technologies to steal and improve. The planet had become a vast laboratory where millions of humans worked day and night to solve the puzzle of how to destroy gods. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in what had once been the Beijing Institute of Technology, now converted into Earth's primary alien research facility. Around her, teams of scientists worked with equipment that violated every safety protocol ever written. They had learned to handle Council technology not through careful study, but through trial and error backed by an alarming willingness to risk explosive failure. The breakthrough came when her team discovered that Council psionics operated on frequencies that human brains naturally generated during extreme emotional states. Fear, rage, love, and hatred all produced neural patterns that interfered with Zephyrian telepathy. The aliens had spent so long transcending their emotions that they had forgotten how to deal with species that embraced them. Within weeks, human soldiers were being trained in combat meditation techniques designed not to calm the mind, but to stir it into controlled chaos. They learned to think in contradictions, to hold mutually exclusive ideas simultaneously, and to generate the kind of mental static that had overwhelmed the first Zephyrian contact teams. The effects were immediate and devastating. Council telepaths found themselves unable to coordinate their forces effectively. Orders became garbled in transmission. Strategic plans fell apart as human mental interference disrupted the psychic networks that held the alien military together. But humanity's most dangerous discovery was not technological. It was philosophical. Captain Marcus Webb sat in the ruins of what had been London, studying captured Council databases with a team of linguists and anthropologists. What they found changed everything. The Council's perfect empire was built on a lie. The 3 ruling races had not evolved beyond the need for conquest and violence. They had simply become so powerful that no one could fight back. The humans began asking questions that the Council had spent 10,000 years trying to avoid. Why did beings with unlimited power need an empire at all? What were they afraid of? What were they hiding from? The answers they found in the alien databases were disturbing. The Council had not transcended emotion and limitation. They had simply buried them so deeply that they had forgotten they existed. Their perfect society was a house of cards balanced on the assumption that no one would ever challenge their authority. The humans were not just winning battles. They were asking questions that threatened to bring down the entire structure of galactic civilization. News of human victories spread faster than the Council could suppress it. Species that had been enslaved for millennia began to remember what freedom felt like. Ancient grudges and buried rebellions surfaced as the Empire's subjects realized that their overlords could bleed. The Altarian collective declared independence after 5,000 years of subjugation, using human-inspired tactics to drive Council forces from their homeworlds. The silicon mines of the Orion sector began broadcasting messages of rebellion across subspace networks, sharing human technical innovations with anyone willing to fight. Even the peaceful crystalline entities of the galactic core began to question why they needed masters at all. The council found itself fighting on 100 fronts simultaneously, each one inspired by human example and equipped with modified human technology. Their perfect war machine, designed to crush individual worlds one at a time, began to break down under the strain of galactic revolt. But the humans were not content to merely survive. They had tasted victory, and they wanted more. Earth's new government, formed from the ashes of old nations and built on the simple principle that any enemy of the Council was humanity's friend, began reaching out to the rebel worlds. Human technical advisors and military trainers spread across the galaxy, teaching other species the arts of asymmetric warfare and technological improvisation. More importantly, they taught them how to think like humans, how to turn weakness into strength, how to find opportunity in disaster, and how to keep fighting when logic said surrender was the only option. They shared the most dangerous weapon in humanity's arsenal, the idea that no problem was truly unsolvable. The Council's response was predictable and desperate. They began deploying weapons of mass destruction, turning entire rebel worlds into glass and ash. But for every world they destroyed, 10 more rose in rebellion. The humans had shown the galaxy that the Council's power came from fear, and once that fear was broken, the Empire began to crumble. High Archon Zelthara found herself in an emergency session that had lasted for weeks, as the Council's leaders tried to understand how their perfect empire was falling apart. The humans had infected the galaxy with something worse than any disease: hope. They had proven that the Council could be beaten, and that proof was spreading faster than their armies could move. The Zephyrian telepaths reported something even more disturbing. As they monitored rebel communications across the galaxy, they detected traces of human thought patterns in alien minds. The chaotic, contradictory nature of human consciousness was somehow contagious, spreading through contact and teaching other species to think in ways that the Council could not predict or control. Lord Commander Vakthos presented his latest tactical analysis with growing desperation. Human technology was improving at an exponential rate, far faster than any species in recorded history. They were not just copying Council equipment anymore. They were creating entirely new forms of technology, based on principles that seemed to violate established scientific laws. Human ships were appearing in Council space equipped with weapons that fired bullets made of compressed time, armor that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and engines that ran on what human scientists cheerfully called controlled impossibility. Their approach to physics was less like science and more like warfare against the universe itself. Nexari Prime Yulkasim reported the most troubling development of all. Human consciousness was somehow affecting the fundamental structure of reality. Wherever humans fought, the laws of physics became more flexible, more open to interpretation. It was as if their refusal to accept limitations was literally rewriting the rules of existence. The Council faced a choice that none of them had ever imagined they would need to make. They could continue fighting a war that was tearing apart their empire and possibly reality itself, or they could do something that 10,000 years of absolute power had never prepared them for. They could surrender. But first, they had to find out if the humans would even accept their surrender, or if humanity had discovered something that the Council feared more than defeat: the joy of impossible victory and the intoxicating taste of bringing gods down from their thrones. The end came not with the roar of battle, but with a question that shattered 10,000 years of certainty. Dr. Elizabeth Harper stood in the ruins of the Nexus, the Council's great space station that human forces had captured after a siege that lasted 6 months. Around her, teams of human scientists worked alongside rebel engineers from dozens of species, all united by the same impossible goal: understanding how the universe really worked. The Council's leaders sat in what had once been their throne room, now converted into something between a laboratory and a courtroom. They were not prisoners exactly. The humans had made it clear that anyone who wanted to leave was free to go. But where could gods run when their worshippers had stopped believing? High Archon Zelthara looked older than her 3,000 years. The constant exposure to human mental patterns had changed her, forcing her to experience emotions that her people had abandoned millennia ago. Fear, uncertainty, and something that might have been curiosity flickered across her face as she watched the human scientists work. Lord Commander Vakthos had disconnected himself from the energy flows that had sustained him for centuries, sitting in a chair like any ordinary being. His attempts to use his powers in the final battles had failed spectacularly, when human interference made it impossible to focus the cosmic forces he had once commanded with ease. Nexari Prime Yul-Qasim existed in only 3 dimensions now, his reality-bending abilities disrupted by the strange effects that human consciousness had on local spacetime. He watched with fascination as human engineers dismantled equipment that his people had considered fundamental laws of physics. Dr. Harper approached them with a datapad in her hands and excitement in her eyes. She had spent the last month studying Council technology with the same reckless enthusiasm that had let humanity survive their first contact with godlike aliens. What she had discovered would change everything. "We know why you were afraid," she said, her words carrying across the vast chamber, where once only thoughts of cosmic significance had been shared. "We found your records, your real records, not the official histories." The council leaders said nothing, but their body language spoke volumes. After 10,000 years of hiding from the truth, someone had finally found it. "You weren't the first galactic empire," Harper continued. "There were others before you, dozens of them. All of them fell the same way, destroyed by species that refused to accept limitations. You built your empire not because you were superior, but because you were terrified of being replaced." She activated her datapad, displaying images that the council had thought were safely buried in the deepest archives. Ancient civilizations that had mastered technologies beyond current understanding. Ruins of worlds where impossible things had become commonplace. The bones of empires that had transcended every limitation except one. The arrival of someone willing to try the impossible. "You weren't gods," Harper said with the gentle voice of someone explaining a simple truth to children. "You were just the latest species to figure out how to cheat at the universe's rules, and like everyone before you, you got comfortable and stopped pushing boundaries." High Archon Zelthara finally spoke, her mental voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from us?" Harper smiled, and it was not the expression of a conqueror. It was the look of someone who had just discovered a new puzzle to solve. "We want you to help us figure out what comes next." The proposal was so unexpected that it took several minutes for the council leaders to understand what they were hearing. Humanity was not interested in ruling the galaxy. They had no desire to become the new overlords of 1,000,000 worlds. They wanted something far more dangerous. They wanted to keep exploring. Over the following days, the greatest minds of dozens of species gathered in the Nexus to work on projects that would have been impossible under the old order. Human scientists shared their techniques for violating scientific laws with council researchers who had forgotten how to think beyond established limits. Rebel engineers combined their species' unique abilities with human innovation to create technologies that existed somewhere between science and magic. The first breakthrough came when a human physicist named Dr. James Martinez successfully convinced a council reality manipulator to help him build a device that could make theoretical mathematics become temporarily real. The resulting machine allowed them to test scientific theories by creating pocket universes where different physical laws applied. Within weeks, they had discovered 17 new forms of energy, 5 types of matter that had previously been considered impossible, and a form of mathematics that worked backward from effect to cause. Human questions combined with alien knowledge produced answers that neither group could have found alone. But the most important discovery was not technological. It was social. Working together, the various species began to develop new forms of communication that combined human emotional chaos with alien logical precision. They learned to think in ways that were both rational and intuitive, both controlled and creative. The galaxy began to develop a new kind of consciousness, one that embraced contradiction and possibility in equal measure. The old empire dissolved not through conquest, but through irrelevance. Why serve distant masters when you could join a community of explorers pushing the boundaries of what was possible? Why fight for territory when you could help discover new forms of existence that made traditional resources meaningless? Some of the Council's client species chose to leave, seeking isolation in the dark spaces between stars. Others joined the growing network of research stations and experimental worlds where impossible things happened on a daily basis. A few simply disappeared into dimensions that human-modified Council technology had made accessible for the first time. The humans, for their part, discovered that their greatest talent was not for destruction but for inspiration. They had a gift for making other species remember what they had given up in exchange for safety and certainty. They taught the galaxy to dream again, to question everything, and to treat the impossible as merely another problem waiting to be solved. 5 years after the fall of the Council, Dr. Harper stood in the observation deck of New Horizons Station, watching as teams of mixed species worked on their latest project, building a gateway to universes that operated on entirely different principles of existence. The project would probably fail. Most of their projects failed, but failure, they had learned, was just another word for interesting data. Behind her, the children of a dozen species played together in the station's gardens, their games involving toys that bent space-time and pets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They spoke a mixture of languages that included concepts no single species could have developed alone, and their laughter contained harmonics that made reality itself seem more flexible. These children would grow up in a galaxy where the impossible was just another word for not yet discovered. They would push boundaries that their parents had never dreamed of crossing, ask questions that would redefine the nature of existence itself, and probably discover new ways to make the universe more interesting than it had ever been before. Council had feared nothing because they thought they had seen everything. Humanity had shown them the most terrifying truth of all: the universe was far stranger, far more wonderful, and far more full of possibilities than anyone had ever imagined. And the best part was that they had only just begun to explore it.